It seems, he says, society will provide treatment for those of your citizens whose physical and psychological constitution is good. As for the others, it will leave the unhealthy to die, and those whose psychological constitution is incurably corrupt, it will put to death. That seems to be the best thing, both for the individual sufferer and for the society. Well, it sounds a bit crude, and it sounds a bit heartless, but it also sounds to me to possess a lot of sensibleness also. So I remember my father in his last years, he had some sort of mental disorder, which at that point, which was 2 decades ago, they couldn't diagnose it, called it Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, senility, organic brain syndrome. The bottom line was his brain was dead. He was a corpse who happened to have an excellent heart and an excellent pulse. So for a couple of years, I went to Methodist Hospital, which is in this vicinity. I would go and see this corpse laid out on the 11th floor. He had a glassy stare in his eye, was completely unconscious of anything and anyone around him. And when I would ask the doctor on call, he would say, I said, how's my father? And he would say, excellent, perfect heart, perfect pulse. And I heard this for 2 years. And I'm thinking, yeah, he has an excellent heart, an excellent pulse, and he's a vegetable. What is the point of this? My mother was 4 floors below him in Methodist Hospital. I'm not ashamed to say there were weeks I would not go to see him. It was completely unbearable. What is going on here? And then there are people who have terminal illnesses in our society. I would have to say my mother, unfortunately, 4 floors below him, she fell into that category. She had a horrible cancer which they couldn't diagnose, which literally, we're not talking about poetry or hyperbole here, it consumed her whole face. Her whole face was just blood and boils. It looked like something out of a science fiction film. And her whole energy and her whole willpower was invested in fighting this cancer. There was no life. It was just a war between my mother's will and the cancer. My mother survived the Nazi concentration camps, and when she was diagnosed with this cancer, she had it in her head, I beat Hitler, I'm going to beat this cancer. But there was no life, nothing, for years. So when I read Plato talk about if you're investing all your energy just to living, then it's time to die. It's time to go. There's no point. We're not immortal. It's not like if you beat this battle, you're going to live forever. No, you're still going to die. Then why not just die before you engage in this downward spiral battle to live with no other purpose? I remember there was a period where my mother had to take about 20 different pills a day. And she used to line them up like Stalin's Red Army with the divisions. And then you had the table, take 2 pills of pill A at 3 o'clock, 3 pills of B at 4 o'clock, 6 of C. What is this? You can love a person to death, but still recognize there's no life here. There's just a fear-filled futility. As if you can win this battle, you will still live. But the truth be told, number 1, we're all going to die. And number 2, you're not living. I didn't have it in me to say it, but you're not living. As I said, I went through my father's experience for approximately 2 years, and he became a milking cow for the hospital, because every time they perform, when you're in that condition, you're constantly coming down with this or that illness. It's not like you just lay there. And so I used to get every couple of months a call in the middle of the night, usually around 3 or 4 a.m. Your father has this, your father has pneumonia. Your father has this. If we don't do an operation, right now he's going to die. And I had to give permission because I was the designated guardian. So what do you do? If I say don't do the operation, I have to bear the fact that I killed my father. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, that's a very difficult decision to make. Oh yeah, just don't skip the operation, kill Dad. No, it's a little tough. And I did that for, as I said, a couple of years, until I realized Daddy was just a milking cow. They were getting $10,000 per operation. And I finally, once they called, and I said, no operation. What do you mean no operation? He's going to die. I said, I know, no operation. Now, by your reasoning, I should have done that next operation, and next operation, and next operation, because maybe there would have been a miracle. No. Time to stop. I say that with complete lack of guilt. I knew it was over. It was actually over 2 years earlier. I did something very stupid by letting my guilt get the better of my good judgment. And it was time to pull the plug ages ago. My late mother's cancer started here in the back. It started up here and then it moved over here. It was just a tiny freckle, as she called it. And it kept growing and growing. And she would go approximately every 3 hours, she would go to the mirror, put a mirror here to see how big it was. 3 hours later, for about 6 years, until, as I said, it consumed her whole face. So her entire being was invested in monitoring and fighting this battle with the cancer. It was absolutely pointless. She ended up, it's not a nice thing to say, especially on camera, but she ended up a monster. It was impossible to be around her. And it was a huge disappointment to hear the things coming out of her mouth. And I remember a friend of mine said, Norman, it's not your mother, it's the cancer screaming. And that was the consolation I got. It was the cancer screaming. But she turned into a total distortion of herself. Her whole being, Plato talks about incurably corrupt, her whole being had been corrupted. I think Plato was right. As I said, my late mother's cancer was undiagnosable, and we were going from one doctor to another doctor to another doctor, and anyone who knows the medical profession knows that all the doctors read the same journals. They go to the same medical conferences. So at a certain point where all the doctors are saying we can't diagnose it, there's probably no diagnosis. But my mother wants to live, and she says, but let's go to this doctor. Let's go to this doctor. And finally I was getting very wearied from this, and I said, I don't really think there's much point in going to another doctor. And then my mother turned to me and said, so what? You're giving me up to die? But I kind of knew there wasn't going to be a miracle over the rainbow. Because if a doctor had a different diagnosis, it would have been in some article in a medical journal, here's an alternative therapy. But it didn't exist.